Welcome, everyone, and this is a special holiday edition of Last Week This Morning. Merry Christmas, everyone. We're coming to you on Christmas Day, and today we're going to do a wrap up of everything that Energy Media covered in 2025, and we're going to talk about our 5 most watched videos. But what I want to do before we get into the heavy stuff and the deep cuts, I thought maybe we would talk a little bit about Markham and myself. And there's been a bit of a fad going on this year on Instagram where everyone's been posting their most listened to song. So Markham, I want to know what you listened to the most this year.
Well, to start off, Merry Christmas, right, to you and Felipe and the kids.
Thank you. Same to you and Joanne.
Well, so far it's a good one. We've got my son's visiting, and we're going to have the rallies over later in the day.
Nice.
It is Christmas. So we have to talk about our favorite songs, right?
Yeah.
See, I'm a child of the 70s. I'm stuck in amber. For me, rock and roll died on 1980. And it's never recovered. It's 45 years of decline in pop music, and the 70s were an amazing period of music, and especially for Canadian bands. Now, so I don't think in terms of songs, I think in terms of playlists, right? So on my phone, I've got a number of playlists. Not all of them are Canadian bands, obviously, but I've got a number that are, and my favorite, far and away, is the Guess Who. Far and away.
I also really like them, but I mean, I would just know their greatest hits. They're definitely not on my playlist.
I get it, but you know what? Now I know what to get you for Christmas next year.
I need the Guess Who.
You need at the very least the greatest hits. But the thing about the Guess Who is the musicianship and the songwriting skills on the B singles and on the deep cuts are really, really good. I mean, I got tired of listening to Laughing and Undone and American Woman and These Eyes, and they get played to death on Canadian radio. Is there still Canadian radio? Nobody listens to it anymore. But back in the day, when I was a younger guy, we listened to it all the time, and they were frequently played. But the really, really good stuff, folks, if for those Canadian listeners who maybe aren't of a certain vintage and are not as familiar with the Guess Who, it is, I think, Canada's premier band. Certainly Justin Bieber can't hold a candle to Burton Cummings and Randy Bachman.
Well, I would have to argue with you because my favorite Canadian band, which was also one of my top songs, is the Strumbellas. And my favorite song this year was One Hand Up, which I think it's not off their most recent album, but again, it's not one of their kind of single releases. It was off the Rattlesnake album, and I listen to the Strumbellas all the time, and by far were my top hits. Do you know the Strumbellas?
That's why I'm grinning over here. I have never heard of the Strumbellas.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, you know that they're famous worldwide, Markham. So I'm going to obviously have to put a playlist together for you.
Well, see, I mean, the fact that I knew Justin Bieber, I mean, that's about as much of contemporary Canadian music as I recognize. And he's long in the tooth now. So I don't know. Yes, that's what we should do, is we should exchange playlists, and you get me some Strumbellas and I'll get you some Guess Who, and we can talk about it on the next year's Christmas show.
Okay, sounds good. And the other thing I wanted to ask you is, tell me about your favorite book this year. Have you been doing any good reading? Because I've got some free time over the holidays, and I just finished it. I obviously like romance novels. Maybe not obviously, but that's what I read in my spare time. And I'm kind of fresh out. I read all of Sheila Flanagan's whole series this year, so I need something to sink my teeth into now.
If you were to take a guess, would you think I was a romance novel kind of guy?
Definitely not.
Definitely not. However, back in when I had time to read, I did like a good, mystery novel, detective novel, crime,
Yeah.
procedural novel, and the not a lot of good. No, I take that back. Peggy Blair from Ottawa deserves.
Oh,
She and I are connected on X, and she is a former lawyer. I think she was a Crown prosecutor, and then she gave that up, and she has another gig that pays the bills, and then she writes these novels, and they're very interesting novels, and they're very Canadian. The ones that I've read this year were set in Cuba, but they featured Canadian characters and links back to Ottawa, which is roughly the area where Peggy lives. So I would recommend that if you're looking for something that's Canadian, interesting, well written, interesting characters, check out Peggy.
okay. I am going to do that. Now, let's talk about the top 5 videos that we posted this year. And I'm going to start down at number 5, and I want to give a big a big shout out to Scott Jensen, who's also one of our Energy Circle members. And you interviewed him back in May. Can Canada pull the plug on Trump's economy? And you were talking about cutting electricity exports to the U.S. Do you remember this interview?
I do, and the point that Scott makes, Scott's an electrical engineer. Right. So you get an
Right.
engineer's perspective on this. It's not about policy. It's not about politics. It's not about, because you remember at the time, Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, was threatening to flick the switch and stop exports from Ontario down into the U.S. And Scott's point of view, or his point was, you can't do that with those grids. The Ontario grid is set up in a way, and I can't remember if it's AC or DC, but that had played into it. Only, if I remember correctly, BC and Quebec are set up at the point where if you wanted to flick the switch on electricity exports, you could do that. And Scott said, like the other big hydro provinces, Ontario and Manitoba, are not set up like that. And so it would take longer and be more arduous. Nevertheless, that's the fact that you would be difficult technically to do it. It still served as a political threat, and Trump took it seriously, and he backed down a little bit, and then Ford backed down a little bit, and then Ford brought it back once or twice, afterwards as a threat. It's like he'd have a little, Trump would say something that would make him mad over lunch, and then he'd come back after lunch and threaten to cut off their electricity exports if they didn't smarten up. And so this is the way that Trump does things, right? He's not a process guy. He's very much a personal relationship and leverage kind of guy. He's the Celebrity Apprentice probably is the metaphor for how he runs his presidency. I mean, that's how he sees the world. And the irony here is the Americans built up this rules-based world order after 1945. They drove the creation of it, benefited from it, and now Trump is coming along and kicking over the ant nest, and it's all about personality and about personal relationships, and you're not negotiating multilateral agreements anymore, using multilateral institutions like the United Nations or World Trade Organization, that sort of thing. It's
Right.
all bilateral, and it's Trump, supposedly doing the deal across the table, right? It's the art of the deal. So, yeah.
Well, for me, that video also talked about East-West interties and what could be considered a project of national interest with or the Office of Projects that's happening right now. And so I think that was kind of some of our early discussions this year about big infrastructure projects that are possible.
Well, we've been talking about here in Canada about creating a national grid or maybe a couple of national grids, because one of the things we have to understand is building transmission lines between Manitoba and Ontario across the Canadian Shield is not on. It's just not economic, and it's not technically feasible, nor is it required. If you think of two big grids, so BC to Manitoba the four western provinces. Then Ontario and Quebec could be another one, or maybe you include the Maritimes. Maybe the Maritimes are a third with the Atlantic Loop with those four provinces.
Right.
And then you've got the territories who we're trying to figure out where they fit into this grand scheme. But the idea of linking provinces for east-west electricity trade has been around for a long time, and it's picked up over the last number of years. We're big fans of it because you've got essentially in Western Canada, you've got the big hydro provinces of BC and Manitoba bookending the two prairie provinces of Saskatchewan and Alberta, which have excellent renewable resources. And so if you built a market that would trade electricity east and west, then when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, they can move electricity into the Alberta and Saskatchewan, and when it is shining and when it is blowing, then that's almost marginal, the marginal cost of zero for electricity. So you use that cheap electricity and you export it out into BC and Manitoba. So we've brought on any number. Dave Gray, the energy economist from Alberta. We've talked about Scott, about this issue with Scott. We've talked about other grid experts, and it's in theory it's a great idea. It's politics has always been the impediment, getting the provinces to cooperate. Now, 2 weeks ago, when the Prime Minister Mark Carney signed the pipeline Energi MOU with Alberta, so Alberta's support for interprovincial interties was a part of that. Not big enough, I would argue. But the problem is that, because Carney's a big proponent of it. I mean, he's been talking about how we need to expand the clean energy. And by the way, for those who don't know, Canada's grid is already 84% zero emission. Electricity led by hydro at 60%, nuclear at 17%, and the rest is wind and solar. But so he's a proponent, but what's he going to do practically? Because still electricity is the jurisdiction of the provinces. He can't mandate, and he can't build it himself. He has to rely on the provinces to cooperate, get together and say, BC and Alberta have been fighting over. They have one little intertie, and it's not even running at a fraction of its capacity because they fight all the time. And they can't agree on the fixing the problem or expanding this intertie. Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta have actually been doing a better job, but BC and Alberta, not so much. So there's, if Carney wants to do this, he's got to come up with a plan. He's got the strategy. The strategy is to expand the power grid and create these 2 or 3 big regional grids. Now, what's the plan for implementing it? And we haven't seen the plan yet. That's the problem.
Okay, well, let's move on to our fourth top story. And this one was about the Imperial oil layoffs, which you posted about. I mean, we did quite a few videos about this, but this one was signaling deeper trouble for Canada. They announced 900 layoffs and operational consolidation. The oil sands production obviously is growing, but employment numbers are falling. So what about that story, Markham?
Well, oil employment in Alberta peaked at about 178,000 back in 2013, 2014. And then in late 2014, the prices fell because the Saudis opened up the oil taps. And then there were a couple of years of soft prices, and employment has never recovered. So it went down. I think now it's been as low as 122,000 and as high as maybe 140,000. But very clearly, this is a structural change. And during that time, in those 10 years, the Alberta oil production, I forget whether it doubled or tripled, but it went up by a lot because the oil sands, came on stream in a big way. So there's a structural issue in the Canadian oil and gas industry where new technologies are replacing old ones, and so you can produce a lot more oil and gas with a lot fewer employees. But that trend is global. And I've interviewed people like Ed Hurst, energy economist at the University of Houston. Exact same trend in in the United States. And why would we be surprised? I mean, the oil and gas industry has been
Yeah.
around for 125 years, and mature industries, as they come under market pressure, cost pressure, what do? They adopt new technologies to cut their costs, and one of their biggest costs is labor. So of course
Yeah.
they become more efficient, and they want to raise their productivity rates. That's what industry does in order to maintain their profitability. So expect that trend to continue is the takeaway.
And also, we've seen things like AI and how that's going to probably impact these industries as well. Now, it's a great segue because our top, like the number three video, was actually an interview with Ed Hurst titled U.S. Oil Patch Slams on Brakes as Trump Policies Start to Hurt. So, this is actually where, he talked about, the policy pressure for low gasoline prices, tariffs rising as drilling costs, rising on drilling costs. And, he was exactly talking about this issue that you just brought up. So, what happens as we go forward in the oil patch?
That's a very good question because, the IEA has been talking about an oil glut coming,
Right.
this year or next year. And just this morning, I was reading on, I think it was Reuters, that there's, excuse me, they're worried about, at this time of year, the bears have taken over the oil market, and they're looking ahead to a glut in 2026, and prices are falling. Brent was $61 a barrel today, something like that. But this idea of a glut has been around for months, and really didn't materialize because China ramped up its inventory, so it bought a lot of oil. There's a lot of oil floating around in ships, storage at sea. What's going to happen with Venezuela? Because now, if Trump, seized a ship, an oil tanker last week, he's promising to seize more. And so, if Venezuelan production drops, will that actually lead to shortages? There's a lot of confusion about where things are going, and I'm sure we could have somebody who's steeped in the global oil markets to come on and sort it all out for us. But for the from where we sit, volatility and uncertainty, I think, are going to rule 2026 is what it looks like, and that volatility and uncertainty increased over 2025. And then, of course, we have the usual problem of, not the usual problem, but the earlier than anticipated peak oil demand in China. And while China's demand from its petrochemical sector is still continuing to rise, it's already peaked and is beginning to fall in the transport sector, which is where most of the oil demand comes from. And I did an interview this morning with an Energi analyst who is talking about how the global South has, over the last 2 years, just fallen in love with electric vehicles, and mostly Chinese, but not exclusively Chinese. Like a lot of, like Vietnam, for instance, has VinFast, which has very rapidly come to dominate the Vietnamese market. And so what we're seeing is double-digit and sometimes very high double-digit growth in those global South markets, particularly in Asia. All of that spells bad news for medium to long-term oil demand. But what effect will it have over the next year or two or three? It's still really uncertain. So my take is, Ed is right. Oh, and we should mention, speaking of Ed, is that he was saying, okay, look, the prices have fallen, and the American drillers are putting their rigs away, and drilling has fallen, and yet production remains really high out of the American shale fields, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that they have adopted much more efficient drilling techniques and production techniques. And so even though they're not drilling as much, they're producing more with the wells that they have. They're extending out their decline curves, and so they're producing more for a longer period of time. And now it looks like over the next year or two, American production may stay much higher than was anticipated. So there's another wild card that gets thrown into the mix.
Well, and So that actually leads into our next story, which was our second highest viewed story, which was an interview with Jeff Barron, who's a lead petroleum economist of US EIA. And it was titled, Oops, US Imports More Canadian Oil Under Trump. So this was, just a recognition that, you know, we are, well, at that particular time, I think this was in August, that refineries were built for heavy crude down in the south. Switching feedstocks is more costly and inefficient, so they're still buying from Canada. And maybe there's a tight global market for medium and heavy barrels. Do you remember this interview, Markham?
Oh, of course. Jeff's actually a very well-respected oil economist with the U.S. Energy Information Administration.
Mm-hmm.
And the headline came from a comment he made about how the percentage of oil imported from Canada remained the same. In fact, from a volume point of view, it did fall slightly. I think it was at a high of 4.1 million barrels a day earlier in the year, and it fell down to about 3.7. But if you go back and you look over the data, in fact, there's a seasonal rise and fall, ebb and flow to imports and exports. And while the decline was a little lower than we would expect historically, it wasn't that much lower. I mean, essentially, my read on this, what I'm reading in the literature, is that in the trade press, is that essentially the risk premium associated with the Trump tariff war is essentially over. Everybody's back. It's essentially back to normal. And I think that, all the concerns we had earlier in the year when Trump, we were talking about putting in maybe an export tax on Alberta, Canadian oil exports into the U.S. We were talking about maybe, the American refineries would pivot over to U.S. light sweet crude domestic supplies from the Permian or the Bakken or whatever. And none of that has really materialized. All of those concerns have kind of dissipated because we now realize that a lot of Trump's posturing is bluster, and he's trying to increase his leverage to make better deals. But when it comes to the oil and gas industry, he wants to keep prices down without messing with the structure of the industry. That hasn't been a perfect solution for him, but it hasn't. Excuse me. There's been no major change in the oil and gas exports down to at least on the oil side for sure.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, because the infrastructure is pretty stable, so then the exports are stable as well.
Well, we thought that there might be a chance of a major disruption and changes. A decline in exports to the U.S. didn't materialize. Nevertheless, Jeff's a good interview and lots of really interesting insights into U.S. imports of Canadian oil.
Okay, and now for our number one video, which probably won't shock anyone. This is when we were talking with Professor Emily Gilbert from the University of Toronto, and we were talking about don't cross the U.S. border unless you have to. And this was earlier on in the year when we saw, less and less Canadians going down south, and lots of concerns over arbitrary questioning, device searches, people being turned away because they follow certain social media accounts, and also some detentions, and just the media about this obviously swayed people not to go down to the U.S. And then I think just in general, people were pretty upset with the U.S. And as many have said, this relationship is over. It's not the same as it was before. We used to be friends, and maybe we're not friends anymore. So what do you have to say to that, Markham?
Well, we're like estranged family at this point in the game, I think.
Yeah.
We're not, Canadians have not gotten over it, as we all know. What she said was that and this was early in the change in travel patterns down to the U.S. And we didn't have a lot of data. We didn't have a lot of reliable anecdotes. So, but she gave, I think, a pretty accurate view of the risks of going down. And one of the interesting things about that video is some of the comments were from people who would say, "Well, I just went down.
Yeah.
I had no problems." And then you take a look and oh, middle-aged white person.
Yeah.
And for friends who were people of color or maybe were in the eyes of the U.S. border guards would be a little more suspicious, they did get a hard time. Now, I interviewed Kenneth Jackson, who is a Surrey-based visa consultant, right, for people who
Yep.
want to work in the U.S. and do business in the U.S. And he gave he gave in 2 interviews, and I think the biggest, most important point that he made was that when Trump came in, he told the border guard, "You undertake extreme vetting." Now, what that means is there are many, many rules on the books that govern the flow of travel back and forth between our 2 countries. And over the years, there have been so little, so few incidents that it became pretty lax. And a lot of the rules weren't followed, or they were, it was pretty relaxed. And when Trump came in, he said, "You follow every one of those rules to the nth degree."
Letter.
Yeah, to the letter, and extreme vetting. And so what happened is, whereas Canadians were accustomed to, very easy back and forth travel, now they were being asked hard questions, and questions that, they considered inappropriate, like, who are you? What have you said about Mr. Trump, President Trump, or do you like
Yeah.
President Trump? And things like that. And some people got pulled aside, and some got, a number got stuck inside the American judicial system, or that's not even the right word, but they were detained, for a week or 2 or longer at a time. And Joanne and I refused to travel to the U.S. for, because of the protest over the Trump's tariffs. But nevertheless, there's also now a high risk because we comment
Yeah.
on Trump all the time and
Yep.
American energy issues. And I don't need to be hauled out, wake up in El Salvador, in a prison some morning. So, but there are a lot of people like us who it's not worth the risk. It's not worth the hassle. And so places like Las Vegas are really hurting because the Canadians are just not coming down. Florida, places where the snowbirds would
Yep.
be, that kind of thing.
Well,
So,
and I had a friend of mine tell me was just in Phoenix recently and said the same thing. The used to be a big place for people to go golfing, and it's hurting. There isn't as many Canadians. So I know that this was earlier on in the year, but we'll have to see if Canadian travel picks up in 2026.
I suspect it will not. And the reason
Yeah.
is because Trump, he just can't leave it alone. And so there's always something coming up where, on a regular basis, there'll be some controversy, some incident, something he says, and gets people mad all over again, or he makes people fearful all over again, because there are plenty of Canadians who don't look like you and I, and they anticipate that crossing the border is going to be a problem, so they just stay away. Add it all up, and but we'll see what 2026 brings, but I don't see a major change. There might be some improvement, but I think the odds are just as good that it could get worse in terms of travel.
Well, that's it for our recap. Now, I want to say, looking forward to next year, Markham and I are committed to having all the necessary conversations we need to have around the energy transition and linking these hot issues like border travel to our work and how that impacts the energy transition in Canada. We're going to continue to push the envelope as much as we can, dig into those top stories. Now, I want to make a few commitments for next year. We are going to be relaunching the podcast in some form. We haven't exactly nailed that down yet, but in January, we will be relaunching the podcast. We are going to be having weekly member-only content starting in January. So if you are one of our members, we've got 80 members on the YouTube channel now. So you guys can expect us to be pumping out at least one thing of member-only content every year. And we just want to keep the conversation going. We really appreciate all the comments we get. We appreciate all the emails and the text messages and all the engagement we have with you folks, which really drives a lot of what we do. So thank you so much for being part of the community, and we are excited for 2026. Markham, what are you most excited about?
Well, I think that we should share with folks that we've been, like December 1st was the beginning of our 18th year. We've been doing this for a
Yes.
long time, and we've worked in all sorts of different media. So you mentioned the podcast. That's the Energy Talks podcast. So, that's audio only. We had 441 episodes under our belt, and we paused it in May because it wasn't clear where it fit in our ecosystem. And that's where I'm going with
Yeah.
this, is that because we do video, we do audio, we written things, we have this ecosystem of various news products, if you will, and we've been thinking about how they all work together. And so we're slowly integrating all of the, for instance, 3 weeks ago we launched our thoughtful energy journalism Substack, and we're
Yeah.
doing regular 1,500, 2,000 word essays on it. Those have proven to be really, really popular. Folks really seem to like them, and each different type of product, whether it's audio, video, or written, seems to attract a different audience. And so we want to start cross-pollinating those audiences. So, for instance, in the Substack essay, you'll get video clips that are embedded in the video. Maybe we'll have some audio clips once the podcast is up and running again, and we'll have. We're experimenting with how that's all going to work, but I think that's going to be a major theme for us heading into 2026, is to bring our current audience into all of what we do, as well as we'll be expanding our audience in a big way out in Ontario and Quebec. That's going to be a major push for us. 2026 is going to be very busy, but also very exciting. And and we should ask people, sign up for our email list. If you want to go to our website,
Yes.
and you'll get the submission form, and you give us permission to send you emails. And if you've noticed that we've been erratic about that, again, it's a horsepower issue over here. We're trying to do a lot, and we don't always get to everything we want to do. The email list has been one of those, but it's starting to grow again, actually pretty substantially. So we're going to experiment with, and we are experimenting with, one email a day with one, maybe two of our stories, whatever medium that happens to be. So bear with us. This is an experiment. If we're annoying you with these daily emails, let us know. So far, I have to say, we've done 2 or 3 of them, the daily ones, and everybody seems to be okay with it. We'll see how that goes.
Yep.
But anyway, that's what you can expect from us coming up. Is we're looking to get you into more of our news products, so that you get the full energy media experience. And also, we're going to be pushing into some new market niches out in East and also into British Columbia.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And once again, just Merry Christmas, everyone. And
Merry Christmas.
we hope you have a great time with your families today. Take care.
And Happy New Year.